I'm Mary Ann Smith. I'm married to Michael Smith. Pray for me. I could use it. Mike asked me to come in and teach this class because I've been a social work administrator for 25 years. One of the things I was really glad to see when I looked at y'all's book is you actually have a textbook that is addressed to social workers who also have to manage people. Back in the day when I took this course in my master's program, it was called administration. And you know that chapter you have that has the hygiene factors and Hertzberg and Maslow and all that? That was my entire course. And then my very first job out of school, I was supervising somebody. And the teacher came to class drunk most nights, which was interesting too. So I really had to kind of fly by the seat of my pants. And I think as master students, there's a pretty good chance that a lot of y'all are going to end up being managers, and I was really glad to see that you have a course that really addresses that. One of the things that was very, very difficult for me in the beginning, the very first employee I ever supervised had an aversion to coming to work. And I was working for the state of Texas in a youth prison, and so I really had no clue how to address this and how to turn that behavior around. And so I read a book on it and went back in, tried to talk to her. She put me on the defensive. We both started crying. It was a mess. It was an absolute mess. So what I want to talk about tonight is how to deal with a lot of the difficult conversations that you have to have with your employees at times. I've had to talk to an employee about a chronic gas problem. And I was working for an employee assistance program, and we're going to talk a lot about EAPs tonight, but he was mandated to come see me because his coworkers were complaining about it, but they didn't tell him why he had to go see the EAP. And so he sat down in my office, and I started, "So, what brings you here today?" My boss said I had to come. "Why'd your boss say you had to come?" I don't know. He said, "You talk to me about it." And that was the beginning of a very uncomfortable conversation. A couple of things. Now, all of y'all read the chapter, right? Well-written book, too, isn't it? I mean, it's easy. It's not like someone's trying to impress you with how smart they are. There were a couple of things in the chapter that I disagreed with, and I just want to kind of get that out there right at the beginning, okay? First of all, the book talks about in most terminations, you give a 2-week warning, and they're still on the job for 2 weeks after that. I have worked in a lot of work places, and I have never, ever had that happen. Now, there's a thing called the WARN Act, W-A-R-N, and it pertains to large workforces. And basically it says if you're going to do a mass layoff, you are required by federal law to give 90 days notice that you're going to do that. And in that case, the workforce that I was involved in, I worked for an aircraft company, and we had to do a layoff. And what we did was we made some tough decisions ahead of time which folks needed to be gone immediately. Those folks that had proprietary information, they were given their WARN notice, and then they were sent home to collect pay for the next 90 days without being in the workforce. But that is the only situation I've ever been in where you can fire somebody for poor performance and still have to put up with them after that. That's just nuts. So I don't know what they were talking about, but I'm just saying in my experience that isn't the case. The other thing your author talks about is that there are sometimes behaviors that you just hope go away on their own. And their example was someone who dressed too casually for the office, and how they pretty much pick up from other people that, okay, jeans aren't okay here. I disagree with that. If you have an employee whose behavior you don't like at that time, or they're not dressed the way you like, or their notes aren't timely, or whatever the problem is, you're doing the employee a disservice by keeping it to yourself. So I think that's really important. Kind of my mantra is always, if you see it, say it right then. If you see them doing something that you really like, say it right then. If they're dealing with a particular family that is just giving everyone else fits and somehow this employee is going places with them, say it right then. And the same goes for when you see something that's not appropriate. That doesn't mean if I think someone's dressed too casually, I walk up to them and say, we're not doing that thing. But you can say right off the bat, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't make it clear to you, we don't wear blue jeans here except on Fridays. And, you know, something like that. Don't make employees guess on what you expect, what is appropriate behavior and what is not appropriate behavior. Okay? So anyway, those are the two issues that I took with the chapter. When you're a supervisor, you have to deal with several different kinds of problems. One, you have to deal with behavioral problems, performance problems, gross misconduct. Those are those acts that happen in the workplace that cannot be tolerated, and that person needs to go right away. Okay? And then the fourth one, this is something your book really didn't talk about, but culture-related issues. And I'm not talking about diversity. I'm talking about the culture of that workplace, how people feel about each other, whether they work together as a group or whether they're a bunch of hens pecking at each other. Okay? So those issues that you see in the workplace that is causing toxicity in the workplace, I think you have to be able to identify those things and deal with them. Let me tell you about the worst culture I ever walked into. It was a child welfare agency, and they thought I walked on water there because I was not Karen, the person I was replacing. I don't know if any of y'all have ever been in that situation, but that is a blessed place to be because you have all kinds of support and enthusiasm just because you're not that horrible person, okay? But when this particular person left, she left it in chaos. The way that they communicated was through gossip and tattling. They never dealt directly with each other. They hated all their community partners. How many of y'all have ever worked in child welfare? Okay, how effective are you going to be if you hate the Department of Children's Services, the courts, the ADA, the judge, and all your subcontractors? How effective are you going to be?
Not very.
Not very, because people will react in kind, okay? But that was the situation I walked in on, is everything is everybody else's fault. No one appreciates us. We're better than everyone else, and they're just nitpicking about how we're supposed to be in court on time. That was a true conversation I had with somebody. So I think it's real important to look at those culture-related things and attack them. Now, one of the things I had to do with this group is they had 20% compliance on timeliness of court-ordered documents. They only got in 20% of their court reports on time. That is terrible. And so I had to deal with that right off the bat. And then in the process of figuring out how we're going to get our court documents in on time, I had some brainstorming sessions with the whole team, and at times there were 60 people on that team, where we talked about what do we like about working here? What's good about this job? What's bad about this job? What makes you keep coming back to work here every day? And those kinds of things. And we had whiteboards just filled with all these things, the good, the bad, the ugly. And one of the things that they said that they didn't like about the workplace is that everyone was always so angry. Okay? So when I came up with a plan for how we're going to get our court reports in on time, and we set a goal. My first month there was January, and we were going to have 100% compliance on our court reports for February. But I've got 6 due in 1 week. How can I help you with that? And we problem solved all those things, and we had a plan to get those court reports in on time. Last day of February came, and we had 100% compliance on all of our court reports. And so on March 1st, I got to work at the crack of dawn, and I cooked breakfast for all those folks. And they came in for the morning meeting in a big conference room. It was decorated to the skies with balloons and posters saying congratulations and yay, we did it. And I served my employees breakfast, all of them. And then while they were finishing up their breakfast, we started in with our team meeting. And this one girl pipes up, has to chew around the breakfast that I just gave her to say, nobody ever appreciates anything we do around here. And I was just absolutely stunned. I couldn't believe it. And then you see all the other heads nodding in the room and that kind of thing. And so after the meeting was over, I asked her to come into my office, and I knew that I had to correct this behavior, but I had to do it in a way that she would not see as another hammer coming down on her, okay? So what I did was I talked to her about what I'd noticed about her power position in the workplace. You are a person that everyone else looks to see how they're feeling. You have so much influence. And she's just sitting taller and taller. She didn't realize she was so popular. It'd been a long time since she was a high school cheerleader. And she was, just really buying into it. And so then instead of saying, you embarrassed me, you made me mad, anything like that in that meeting, I just said, I'm gonna need your help to be successful here. I really need for you to get on board with me and support me so that other people will know it's okay. And that was the way I dealt with it, and it was very, very effective. It worked quite well. So anyway, getting a little off track, but the things related to the culture, who gossips about who, you need to look at informal power. Okay? I worked for an agency where the most powerful person in that place, and the one that scared me the most, was the secretary. Because she was secretary to the vice president, she had his ear. If she didn't like somebody, that person was gone. Okay? It's real important that you know in your workplace, where is all that informal power? Where are the cliques? Who's always in this group versus that group? Who gets excluded? Those things are important. And once you understand those cultural influences there, then you can start to work to change that culture, back up, shore up the things that you like that are going on in that culture, and eventually eliminate the things that aren't important. Okay? The other thing I had to work with in that particular workforce was everybody would come to me to tattle on somebody else, because that had been very effective in the previous regime. You didn't like somebody, you go running to the director, and if she was off her medication that day, I'm not kidding, she'd walk out there and fire that person right then. And so that was something that I knew I needed to change right away, because there were 40 to 60 of them depending on how many cases we had, and I didn't have time to fire all those people. And so I told the group, as a group, I don't do gossip. If you've got a problem with one of your coworkers and you bring it to me, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, what happened when you talked to her about it? Well, I can't talk to her. She just won't listen. She'll just get mad. Oh, okay, so you haven't talked to her yet. When are you planning on talking to her? Aren't you listening to me? She'll just blow up at me. Okay, well, tell you what, then it sounds like in order for you to feel safe doing this, the three of us need to sit down together and have that conversation. And I told them we were going to do that, and then I followed through with it over and over and over. And eventually they got the message that it's not okay to just tattle on people here. Okay? Another thing that I think you need to understand about being a social service administrator is that the people that you are supervising, they're the ones with the hard job. The ones that are working directly with the clients, they've got the highest stress level, they've got the most frustration, they have been abused physically, verbally, mentally, emotionally by these people, and they're getting paid a whole lot less money than you to do it. And I think it's always very, very important to remember that. I believe in something called servant leadership. Do we know about this? Okay. Very, very effective style of management where the director or the person in charge is not the puppeteer. That person is a big picture person, sees everything that's going on, and jumps in to support what needs to be supported, and then jumps back out. Okay? As a manager, I am here to make sure you can be successful and you can keep your job. Okay? One of the things you have to think about when you're working, supervising social workers, is that if you don't manage them correctly, you're going to have a whole lot of turnover. And every time you have turnover, the client's treatment gets disrupted, everyone's caseloads go up, and then you've got to spend 6 months after you get through the hiring process to get their replacement up and on their feet. So I think it's really, really important to be proactive when you're supervising folks, encourage them, back them up, notice every single little success they have and celebrate it, because those are the things that are going to keep them there. How many of y'all went into social work to get rich? Nobody in here? Okay, good. I had a BSW intern one time when she was about to graduate, and she goes, I'm sorry, I'm not talking to anybody who's offering less than $45,000. And I was like, ooh, baby, ooh. Yeah, not likely. Most of us don't get into this field to get rich, and that means the money is not that big a motivator. Okay? What motivates us is job satisfaction, close relationships with coworkers, getting recognition, feeling competent, getting new challenges. The money's just not going to make that much difference. Okay, most of your chapter talks about disciplining employees, and there were several, oh, we don't have any, okay. There were several concepts that I really want to underscore. One of them was progressive discipline. This is a wonderful, wonderful tool. Okay? When I worked for the aircraft company, I was in labor relations, and basically what that means is I was there to act as a liaison between managers and the bargaining unit, supporting managers' efforts to control the work without violating the union contract. You know what that means? I was there to fire people and discipline people. And I did that for 9 months before I fried and got a different job. But I learned to really, really appreciate progressive discipline. The thing about progressive discipline is that if it comes down to termination, nobody's going to be surprised. You've had warnings. Your book talks about a verbal warning, written warning, and then suspension, termination. Okay? I add an extra step in there. My first step is to assume that the reason for the poor performance or the misbehavior or whatever is a failure of training. And so the first thing I'm going to do is coach. Okay? And coaching is basically, it's a conversation, and it starts with the bottom line. Susie, I've noticed that you have been late to work every day this week, and you've left clients waiting 3 of those days. That has to stop. Okay? And then what do? You close your mouth. Okay? And you let the person respond to that. I think sometimes when we're in uncomfortable conversations, we tend to get diarrhea of the mouth, and we just keep talking and talking and talking to avoid a possible conflict. Okay? But when you're coaching, you state the problem in very specific terms, and then you close your mouth and you let them respond. Okay? At this point, especially if you're talking about something like punctuality, you're gonna get a sob story. Oh, my husband left me, and I've got to get my kid on the bus, and the bus doesn't get there till this time, and blah, 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 blah. Okay? And at that point, I'm going to not feed into that, because I'm a social worker. I like talking about people's problems. I think it's cool. But that, in the workplace, you do not want to be put in the position where you're everybody's therapist or mother. That is not a good place to be. You'll burn out, okay? So they say what their problem is. I am so sorry to hear about that. And we can talk about referring you over to the Employee Assistance Program in a few minutes. Right now, we need to talk about how are we going to problem solve. Okay? In some cases, it's a matter of changing their schedule around. And in some workplaces, you can do that. Others, you cannot. Try working for the federal government and telling them you need to start 30 minutes later than everybody else. That's not going to work. Okay? So you problem solve it. What do you think would help you get to work on time? Okay? Once you come up with a plan, then you contract with them. And it can just be verbally. Okay, so I will go ahead and flex your schedule so that you come in 30 minutes later in the morning and stay 30 minutes later in the evening. Okay, if I do that, are you going to be able to get here on time every day? Yes. Okay. Well, we'll be following up with this in 2 weeks. Okay, that's the next step. You follow up. Notice that you've been to work on time every day for the last 2 weeks. Looks like it's working. That's great. Thank you. I really appreciate having you here. And then that's the end of it. Okay? If that model doesn't work, describe the problem, shut your mouth, problem solve, contract, follow up. Then, in my book, you go on to progressive discipline, okay, which usually starts with a verbal reprimand, and I have never been able to wrap my brain around why it's called a verbal reprimand when you're writing it down. But you do have to write it down, okay? Some workplaces call it step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, instead of verbal, written, all that, okay? But by the time you get to a verbal reprimand, you've changed her schedule, she's still not showing up for work on time, then you're going to do your first real write-up. You're going to pin their ears back a little bit, okay? It's going to start the same way you started the last one, okay? I've noticed that even though we changed your schedule, you're still not showing up for work on time. That needs to change immediately. and then you don't shut your mouth. Okay? Today we're doing first warning, and I'm telling you that my expectation is that you be to work on time 99% of the time over the next month. And if you are late, then we're going to go to the next step. Do you understand that? Yes. But you know, my husband and my kid... Did you follow through on the referral to the EAP? That's why EAPs are so cool, because you can just slough it all off on them. Okay? But you don't let them make excuses. You don't let it turn into a back and forth. One of the biggest offenses that you'll see is people turning it around on you. Oh yeah, well I happened to notice that you were 45 minutes late last week. Don't bite. Okay? You just, we can talk about that another time. Right now, we're talking about you and your attendance. Okay? And then anytime, again, you're going to tell them that you're going to follow up, when you're going to follow up, what the expectation is, and what they can expect if the expectation isn't met. And you do that every step of the way. Okay? One thing that I don't think your book emphasized nearly enough is the importance of documentation. As soon as I think I got an inkling of a possible problem with an employee, they get their own little file in my desk. It's not their personnel file, it's just my place to put my notes. Okay? Inappropriate emails get copied and go in there. Any email exchanges that I have with them concerning their performance, good or bad, goes in there. Okay? Notes of every meeting go in there. And that way, if it comes down to termination at some point, you've got something to back it up. The last thing you want to do is have an ugly termination. Because if you do it wrong, or if you say the wrong thing, you make yourself vulnerable and you make your nonprofit vulnerable. So very important to have that documentation. There have been times in my career, there are some people that get into social work to solve their own mental health issues. And I have had to deal with people who are bipolar and off their meds. I've had to deal with people who have such severe anxiety disorders that they call you sobbing at 3 o'clock in the morning. And just a wide range of problems. When you're dealing with someone that you suspect has some kind of mental illness or some other kind of impairment, like alcoholism, drug abuse, something like that, okay? The first thing you're going to do is not voice that out loud to anybody. And here's the reason for it. Employees are protected by the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, which means you can't terminate somebody because they have substance abuse, mental illness, physical impairment of some kind. Okay? You can find, this is an at-will state, right? I haven't lived here very long. I think Tennessee's at-will. You can fire somebody because she's wearing a purple shirt and you don't like purple. Okay? You can't fire somebody because they have a mental illness or an addiction of some kind. Okay? And there was a case maybe 10 years ago where a supervisor suspected that an employee had a drinking problem and told other supervisors that. And when it went to court, the ruling was the ADA kicked in the minute that supervisor diagnosed that employee. So even if the employee had never touched a drop of alcohol in his life, he was now covered under ADA. Okay? So be careful about that. But if you think somebody has mental illness, a personality disorder, have y'all studied personality disorders yet? Ugh. Yeah. I started my career working in a psych hospital, co-ed psych hospital for adolescents with personality disorders. It was fun stuff. Anyway, if you suspect that something like that is going on, at that point, you need to start documenting everything, okay? And the way I do that with folks that I'm very, very concerned about is that I am going to take notes during every face-to-face meeting that we have. I'm going to have them read over those notes, make sure it's accurate, add their comments at the bottom, and sign off on it. Offer them a copy if they want a copy. If they don't want a copy, just put it in the file. But you need that intensity of documentation, mainly because folks who have personality disorders, addiction issues, have a long-distance relationship with the facts. And they can be very, very compelling in their rewriting of history, and it can blow up in your face like nobody's business. Yes, ma'am?
Walk us through it for a second. So you suspect somebody's got a personality disorder or an addiction problem, and you're documenting things just by what you observe. Mm-hmm. You then call that employee into your office and say, I've observed such and so, and I've documented it here. Would you like to read it? Is that how you do it?
Mm-hmm. What I'm going to talk to that employee about is what I'm seeing in the workplace that is unacceptable. Okay? I see you falling asleep at your desk. I see you coming back from lunch with slurred speech. I smelled alcohol on you this morning. You never say, I think you've got a drinking problem. And you never say, I think you're borderline. And you give me the willies. You document what you are, what is observable, measurable, describable. Okay? That needs to stop immediately. Does that make more sense to you? Yes. Okay. You don't say, I think you're nuts, as much as we'd like to.
So can you refer them to the EAP and that's still okay?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we'll talk more about about how to make a referral to the EAP, how to bring it up in just a few minutes.
Well, what about, what if you don't have an EAP at your agency? You just refer them out to the community?
That's a scary thought.
I don't have an EAP. Never have in any agency I've been in work.
Really? And I've had them in almost every agency. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about EAPs for a while. That seems to be where y'all are at, and I need to be a servant teacher here. Okay. Let's start at the beginning. Employee assistance programs have been around since the 70s. I spent 5 years working in an employee assistance program, and it was a really cool job. If any of y'all are interested in doing EAP work when you get out of school, I'd suggest you get some counseling experience under your belt and get your clinical license, and that will make you marketable. EAPs tend to be a pretty safe environment. You know, since I've worked in prisons and street gangs and psych hospitals and all that was kind of a cushy job for me. It tends to pay better than the private nonprofits, okay? But a lot of them now are, they're contracting with therapists out in the community. And so you actually might never go into the EAP building. You're going to go to someone that has an office in your neck of the woods or whatever. Okay? Employee assistance programs are a wonderful, wonderful tool. If you have an employee that you're concerned about, any employee that you're having a first step conversation with, you always want to have that material available. And here's the language you use. You don't say, I think you're nuts, go to the EAP. What you can say is, I know you're really struggling in the workforce right now, and sometimes that can be a sign that there are problems outside of here that are interfering. I'm not prying, I don't need to hear information about your private life, but just in case you have personal issues that you think are impacting your professional life, go talk to these folks. It's confidential. They'll never tell me they saw you. Okay? The way EAPs will report back to the business is with head count. We saw 3 Youth Villages employees this month. They won't say any identifying information or what the issues were. Okay? And so that's a voluntary kind of thing. Most EAPs will cover both the employee and their immediate family. I've got a daughter in Texas who is seeing a counselor right now through ETSU's Employee Assistance Program. And it's just lovely. A mandatory referral usually is not going to happen during your first progressive discipline move. Okay? You're going to wait until the second one. You must make sure that your company has policy that supports a mandated referral.
Yeah, because we went to the EAP training and they didn't tell us that we could do a mandatory referral. She needed a mandatory referral.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you though, with somebody that far down the road, they may be so defended that the EAP counselor isn't going to get any more out of them than you did. You know, so it's not all you got to do is hand them over to the EAP and bada bing, bada bang, they're fixed. But a lot of times it can help. Okay, but your company must have policy that supports making that a mandated move. Okay. In a mandated referral, usually what's going to happen is the person making it mandatory is going to call the EAP or send them an email giving a brief synopsis of what the problem is. And I ran the gamut in 5 years. It was unbelievable. My biggest company had 10,000 employees, and it was a unionized environment, and I got some wild ones. It was just everything from sexual harassment to having loud, howling sex in a broom closet. I mean, it just, you can't even imagine. I dealt with a high-level executive, a woman, who took a Diet Coke into work every morning that had just enough Coca-Cola in it to make it look like the right color. And the rest of it was bourbon. And it took them a while to figure out why her behavior changed as the day wore on. Okay? I already told you I had somebody come in because of chronic flatulence, body odor, a guy that would just stand across the hangar and just look at a woman and just, and it would go on and on. I mean, creepoid stuff. I had a young man come in who, he was bullied horribly in the workplace. I would guess his IQ was right around 80, just smart enough to kind of hide. And his social skills were just awful. He was a goofball. It was just, everything he said was inappropriate. He acted kind of like an overgrown lab puppy. in there. He'd be, climbing all over. Hey, look at me, look at me, look at me, that kind of thing. And people just bullied him mercifully. Well, he had to come to he got mandated to the EAP because of misbehavior in the workplace. And here's what happened. He worked in the shipping department. And somebody, as a joke, had glued down his X-Acto knife onto his bench. And he went to pick it up, of course, and he couldn't pick it up, and he's struggling. Everyone else is just rolling in the aisles laughing at him. So he decided that he was going to play a joke of his own. And he took an empty box, and he super glued it to the floor. And then he sealed it, just like they always seal their stuff. And then, this is why I think he wasn't very bright, he put his initials on the tape of the box like you're supposed to every time you tape a box shut, so they know who packed it for shipping, okay? So somebody comes by, sees this box in the middle of the aisle, what's that doing there, and goes to pick it up and it won't move. And so he assumes it's very, very heavy. So he calls another guy over to help him. Now there are 2 people working on this box. And they ended up doing the walkie-talkie to get a forklift over there to pick up this box. And of course, when the forklift went to lift it up, the box tore up and he was the only one laughing. So that was his first referral to me. But he kept having to come back to me and come back to me. He wore, put a T-shirt over his head one day and went up to the king bully and says, "Look, I'm your bride, aren't I pretty?" Okay. Another time he wrote, somebody had called him a very bad name. So he went into the bathroom and wrote on the wall, "George is the very bad word." Okay. Got caught. Had to come see me. At one point, I sat him down and we came up with a list of 15 words he could never say in the workplace and 10 jokes he could never make in the workplace. And he carried that with him every day when he went to work. But the EAP would mandate people for everything from personality issues to a guy they found sobbing in the corner of a hangar one day. Somebody else that when he would get nervous, he would tap on the zipper of his pants. And he was nervous a lot. And he had no clue he did that until I gave him that piece of feedback. So it was fun. It was very unpredictable. There were times when I dealt with very suicidal people. Do y'all remember the Susan Smith thing years ago where she killed all 5 of her children? I had a new mama come into my office while that was in the news. Her kid was 3 months old and she was having intense fantasies about drowning her baby in the bathtub. And that was a scary day. But EAP work, you're kind of all over the place. You just never know what you're going to deal with until they come in.
So in that situation, did you call in a referral or what did you do?
I did everything I could think of. First thing I did was remind her the limits of confidentiality, and you're not safe, your baby's not safe, I cannot keep this to myself. Okay? I called her husband, got him to come in to the office immediately, called a psychiatrist and talked the psychiatrist into staying late that evening to see her that day. When her husband got there, we talked about a safety plan, understanding that she could never, ever be alone with that baby until a doctor said that she could. And so anyway, I stayed with her till it was time to see the psychiatrist. She and her husband went straight to the psychiatrist. They called me when they got to that office, and she was hospitalized that night, which is what needed to happen. But that was kind of a scary day. Okay. EAPs also come in real handy when you have a disaster in the workplace. I've dealt with a lot of bank robberies. You know, even while the FBI is still there, and by the way, FBI are just as cool in real life as they are on TV. I'm telling you, they just rock. But I would be in the bank while the police and the FBI were still there investigating, debriefing the employees. A store robbery I got involved in, a plane crash at one of our aircraft plants. And then a store robbery where in the middle of the debriefing, the store manager, assistant store manager, had been in the store by himself when they got robbed. We're doing the debriefing. All of his coworkers are supporting him. The FBI comes in and arrests him. Yes. We had another debriefing after that. Yeah, I went in another area. So EAPs are real useful for that. When a client's foster parents are killed in a car accident, or I had a situation where one of my social workers got a brain aneurysm out of nowhere and left work one day and was dead that night. It's really, really weird. Call in the folks, do the debriefing, okay? EAPs can also be really good as far as coaching managers on how to deal with specific problems. I did a lot of training when I was at the EAP, dealing with difficult people, recognizing signs of substance abuse in the workplace, hiring for keeps, which was all about how to select the right person for the job so that 3 months down the line you're not having to start over. At one point, I trained every manager in a factory with 10,000 people on how to tell people they're being laid off. And it took them through every step. And what was really sad about that is at the end of the day, after they notified everybody, another level of managers came in and laid off some of those managers that had been laying people off all day. So that didn't go real well. If you don't have an EAP, I would say when you're doing that first write-up or the verbal reprimand or whatever your company calls it, go ahead and have a local counseling center. Do y'all have mental health agencies here, the nonprofits? Yeah, okay. Give them a card for those folks and suggest same speech. Sometimes when someone is struggling in the workplace, it's because they've got some personal issues going on outside the workplace. I don't know if that's the situation here, but I want you to know this agency has some sliding scale counseling available. I'd encourage you if you have any personal issues. Okay. So anything else about EAPs?
We actually had the EAP representative, the managers, I guess the regional administrator, called in an EAP person because there was a lot of uproar among the employees about one employee. And there was two having kind of a foster parent, and there was one office. It was just a big mess, and I mean, we felt she was wrongly. The whole situation was wrong. That she was being called out, and it wasn't her issues; it was the other person, the other employee.
Mm-hmm.
So they called them in. It was very interesting to see. So we all got in a combo training. She counseled us. Really wasn't that helpful because it didn't stop anything, but.
Yeah, that seems to me to be an odd kind of situation to call the EAP in on. Now, I've done team buildings when I was working at the EAP. They've got one department where, you know, it's just a cat fight in there day after day, and they'd bring me in to do some team building, set some ground rules on how they communicate and that kind of thing. But bringing in an outsider to talk about, wow, that just seems kind of awkward to me, because as a manager, I can't discuss with any employees about what the issue was, which is a tough place to be, because you know, everyone, that office gossip is just going round and round and round. And as a manager, you have a responsibility to not set the record straight, because you're violating that employee's confidentiality. So, kind of strange.